Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to episode 7 of Young Justice, Denial. We begin this episode in New Orleans on July 27th, where an elderly man with a cane, voiced by Ed Asner, visits the psychic Madame Xanadu in the hopes of being able to speak with his deceased wife, Inza, again. After the man pays Madame Xanadu a hefty price, it appears as though Madame Xanadu was able to make contact with Inza's spirit, but the man quickly laughs at this and reveals that the psychic is actually a phony. He points out all of the devices and tricks that she's using to simulate talking to spirits, and points out that her performance of Inza was inaccurate, he describes Inza as being a spitfire, and he expresses disappointment because he says Madame Xanadu actually has the aura for actual magic. Suddenly, someone known as Abra Kadabra appears and kidnaps the elderly man and disappears into thin air. Naturally, Madame Xanadu is freaked out by this and runs into the back room. But then we see the cane of the elderly man. It lifts itself up into the air, and then it disappears into thin air too. We then cut to Mount Justice on August 19th, where Superboy and Aqualad are having a sparring match, and Superboy is putting Black Canary's training to good use. Ever since Fireworks, we saw that Miss Martian has been attracted to Superboy, and Infiltrator, the previous episode, revealed that Artemis is attracted to Superboy as well. So Miss Martian and Artemis are talking to each other, and they're trying to convince the other to date another team member. So Artemis is trying to suggest that Miss Martian date Aqualad, while Miss Martian tries to suggest that Artemis date Kid Flash. When Red Tornado passes by, the Young Justice team members present question him if he has any missions for them. And when Red Tornado responds that it's Batman's responsibility to give the missions, they respond that Batman is off with Robin somewhere else, taking care of a crime elsewhere. And while it isn't an official mission, Red Tornado does end up telling them about the disappearance of Kent Nelson, the elderly man that we saw in the opening scene. He explains that Kent Nelson was a member of the Justice Society of America, the predecessors to the Justice League, and more specifically, he was Dr. Fate, a magic-using superhero. Although Kid Flash quietly comments to Artemis that he doesn't believe in magic and thinks that Dr. Fate is just putting on an act, pretending to use magic. But then he quickly pretends he does believe in magic in order to impress Miss Martian when he hears Miss Martian show admiration for Dr. Fate and belief in magic. And eventually, Red Tornado does trust the Young Justice team to look for Kent Nelson. The reason why his disappearance is a big concern is because he's supposed to guard a powerful artifact, the Helmet of Fate. So Red Tornado gives them a key that he says will take them to the Tower of Fate, and that it's located in Salem. So that's where the Young Justice team members head off to. But when they reach Red Tornado's coordinates, they don't find the tower's not there, and they don't know how to reach the tower. But they don't realize that they're being watched by a cat, and the cat enters an abandoned theater, and that's where Abra Kadabra is, where he's trying to interrogate Kent Nelson. And there's someone else with Abra Kadabra as well, the owner of the cat. He bears a resemblance to a kid in a suit, but in actuality, he's Clarion, the witch boy. And while Teakle, that's the cat's name, by the way, Teakle tries to get Clarion's attention, but Clarion doesn't really pay the cat much attention at first. So Teakle is a little more persistent and finally gets Klarion and Abra Kadabra, for that matter, to see what it spotted earlier. And eventually, Aqualad figures out that they need to take a leap of faith, so to speak. So they're in Red Tornado's coordinates, the coordinates he gave them. He holds out the key that Red Tornado gave him, and the Tower of Fate appears, and the door opens up. Inside, they see a projection of Kent Nelson. I guess you could describe it as the magic equivalent of voicemail. And the projection questions what they're doing in the Tower of Fate. Kid Flash claims that they're true believers seeking Dr. Fate, but this results in the floor falling apart and the team members are falling into a pit of lava. While that's happening, Klarion and Abra Kadabra take the chance to sneak into the tower with Kent being held hostage and kind of using all sorts of tricks to get themselves through the tower in the hopes of finding the Helmet of Fate. As for the Unjustice team members, Miss Martian actually answers the question, saying that Red Tornado sent them to see if Kent Nelson is okay. So the lava, it just disappears, and the floor is cool to the touch, as Aqualad points out. Artemis takes the chance to chew out Kid Flash for how he almost got them barbecued by trying to impress Miss Martian. And Kid Flash admits he doesn't believe in magic and goes on a rant about how science can answer everything. And Aqualad responds, Aqualad wants to put that theory to the test, and he pulls up the floor. While Kid Flash is worried about a backdraft from the lava earlier, it actually leads into a snowy area, which Artemis takes the chance to poke fun at Kid Flash for being wrong all the time. But Kid Flash tries to come up with another scientific explanation for this. While they're in the snowy area, they find Kent Nelson's cane, and Kid Flash and Artemis grab the cane at the same time, and it disappears with them somewhere else. So the three remaining team members are traveling through the snowy area. They talk a little bit about Kid Flash's disbelief in magic and figuring that it's trying to apply a scientific answer, or trying to explain everything with science is Kid Flash's way of trying to control what he doesn't understand, is the conclusion they come to. But then they see a door in the distance. Elsewhere in the tower, we see Abra Kadabra and Clarion are still trying to interrogate Kent Nelson. And then the cane appears with Kid Flash and Artemis. With the cane around, Kent Nelson takes control of it to escape from them. And he, Kid Flash, and Artemis go into an elevator. And while they're in the elevator, Kent takes the time to introduce himself formally. They introduce themselves. And we hear that Abra Kadabra is a phony magician. He uses advanced technology to simulate magic. But Clarion is an actual legitimate magic user. And to be more specific, Clarion is Clarion is a Lord of Chaos, the opponent of the Lord of Order, Dr. Fate. When the elevator reaches the other point in the tower, Klarion and Abra Kadabra are already waiting for them. And the doorway that the other three team members find, it leads them there too. So they're all together in the same room now. Now, Kent Nelson casts another spell, and Kid Flash ends up going with him, but Clarion follows after them. So Abra Kadabra deals with the rest of the Unjustice team members present. And Kent Nelson, Kid Flash, and Clarion are now at the top of the tower, and the Helmet of Fate is now visible. Kent reaches for it, but Clarion blasts him, and Kent is not going to make it. He manages to put up a force field before he breathes his last breath and tries to tell Kid Flash to take a leap of faith. Kid Flash doesn't understand what Kent means at first, but eventually he takes the hint and he takes the helmet. Clarion tries to warn Kid Flash that he might not be able to take the helmet off if he puts it on, but Kid Flash puts it on all the same. So now Kid Flash is in a blank area where the Echo actually says things before he says it, and Kent's spirit is in there too. He reveals that his spirit followed Kid Flash into the helmet, partially because of the number of times Kent has used the helmet in the past. But in any case, Kent Nelson explains that the Lord of Order Nabu is the source of Dr. Fate's power. And Dr. Fate's voice is the host's voice and Nabu's voice talking in unison. So in this case, it's Kid Flash's voice as the host's voice. And Kent also explains Kid Flash is no longer in control of his body. Nabu has taken the steering wheel, so to speak. But they can watch the fight from within the helmet of Fate. So we do see the Lord of Order and the Lord of Chaos fight each other. And eventually, Dr. Fate defeats Clarion by attacking Tikal, because Tikal is Clarion's familiar, or his anchor to the physical realm, just as how the Helmet of Fate is Nabu's anchor into the physical realm. So Clarion has to retreat now that Tikal has been attacked, and Dr. Fate also manages to take care of Abra Kadabra as well. But the big problem now is Nabu refuses to allow Kid Flash to take off the helmet, saying that the world needs him, the world needs Dr. Fate, the world needs order. But Kent convinces Nabu against this, saying that Kid Flash doesn't have an affinity for magic, and he says that Kid Flash will hold on to the Helmet of Fate so that when the proper host is found, they'll be able to use the Helmet of Fate. And Nabu agrees to these terms, so he allows Kid Flash to remove the helmet. Kent also gives Kid Flash one last piece of advice. He tells Kid Flash to find his own Spitfire. So Kid Flash is able to remove the helmet now, and they've taken care of this crisis. We then cut to August 20th, and they're back at Mount Justice. Kid Flash puts the Helmet of Fate on the bookshelf where the other souvenirs are, and he tries to annoy Artemis by claiming he still doesn't believe in magic. He then thinks of Kent Nelson's last advice to him about finding his own Spitfire, but then the episode ends with Kid Flash trying to invite Miss Martian to a magic show that he got tickets for. Now, following Greg Wiseman's statements about how episodes 3 through 8 are supposed to be spotlight episodes for the members of the Young Justice team, with episode 2 being when the team was first formed, this episode is dedicated to Kid Flash as the spotlight character. We do get a quick explanation of how he acquired his super speed powers. He recreated the explosion that led to Flash acquiring his powers. Both the previous Flashes, actually. And yeah, well, we might cross that bridge later, discuss that in a later video, but we do get a brief origin about, Kid Flash. We also do get to hear a little bit more about some of the other characters. Like Aqualad mentions that he learned about sorcery in Atlantis, for example. And we do get to learn about the Justice Society of America, the predecessors to the Justice League. So that's not a nice touch, because usually, these days, most people don't seem to know about the Justice Society of America, or at least the people I've conversed with. They seem to be more familiar with the Justice League. So it was nice that they actually brought up the Justice Society of America. And it helps to make Earth-16's history more rich, that we hear about the past of Earth-16 before the TV series takes place, the Young Justice TV series. So that was a nice touch. And Robin was absent in this episode. This was partially done for budget reasons. Admittedly, Young Justice was a very expensive show, and they had an economic cast where they had multiple characters played by specific voice artists, but also it was partially done to reflect real life, because people we know in real life have their own adventures, so to speak, that we don't get to take part in. So that was a nice touch as well. And we actually do get to find out what Robin and Batman were up to during the events of this episode. That's covered in the tie-in comics. And once again, I'm really considering discussing the tie-in comics after I discuss the episodes of Young Justice. Otherwise, Madame Xanadu is probably another character who's hinted to play a bigger role down the line, because Kent Nelson commented that she did have the aura for actual magic. She doesn't appear again, though, for the rest of Season 1, and she doesn't appear in Season 2 either, but maybe we'll get to see her return in Season 3. We'll just have to be patient and see what happens when Season 3 does eventually, is released to the public eventually. And we get to meet Clarion the Witch Boy, who's made into a Lord of Chaos in this series, or this adaptation. And otherwise, this episode would be a good example of an innocuously important episode. That means an episode that doesn't seem very important at first glance, but thanks to hindsight with later entries, we see that the episode is more important than we originally anticipated. And you'll see why this episode is more important than first impressions would suggest down the line. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So there we go. We got ourselves, Kid Flash got his spotlight episode. We got to learn a little bit more about Earth 16's history. And otherwise, we found some new bad guys to cover. And the Helmet of Fate will be important later on. Dr. Fate's, the next host of Dr. Fate, is now another ongoing plot line for Season 1. And we'll get an answer for that later on. But there you go. We've now discussed episode 7 of Young Justice on this channel. Take care, and until next time.